All right, Matthew, welcome to Module 6, Building a Training Plan, putting it together and getting started. Okay, as an overview for this module, we have recapping the last 5 modules, a debate between Matt and I, 6 steps to a successful training plan, planning around an event and developing a timeline, build, evaluate, and tweak your plan with a skeleton plan, some pro tips, podcast episode, and video resources. So let's get into it. All right, Matt. So we want to recap what we've done so far in the previous 5 modules and really where we are now in terms of putting the plan together. So we started off and we want to introduce energy systems and the importance of aerobic development. And really that just followed on into, power and heart rate, training zones, how to analyze your training after that. Really, those 3 modules all lent itself towards making sure you are always developing that aerobic system. So training zones we can utilize to make sure that we are training the right energy systems. And then we can use our equipment, our sensors, our devices to make sure we're in those zones which represent that aerobic development and those different energy systems. Then we can utilize Training Peaks to analyze those devices, those zones, those energy systems. And from there, we start to put into place like the periodization. So where is the best time to ensure that we can develop aerobically? Because, we've discussed the importance of that across a season or building up to a peak event. And really that leads into now like putting it all together. Like that's kind of how I see it, Matt.
Would we're actually going to put it together. Like we're actually going to like start to build a plan.
Yeah. So you've come this far. It's time to put the plan together.
Okay. Well, I think we need to, this is where I start to have some holdbacks about being a sports scientist, but also being a coach. And it's because when I'm building a training plan, sometimes I feel like I'm not being a scientist. Like I'm being a bad scientist because I'm combining information and feelings together to put in a training plan to build it. And I feel like I'm not a scientist. What do you think about that?
Yeah, sometimes I place something in a week and you go, what? Like, am I doing that because I know that athlete will feel better? There's no, it's just feeling based, this is where we get into the art and science of building a training plan. And we put this course together and I said to Matt, I'm not sure if there's enough science in this. And he goes, well, training plans aren't really scientific anyway. And I was like, whoa, I don't know about that. Like, what about everything we've just covered in the previous 5 modules, which then led us to like this slide in terms of the debate. Like when you or I put a plan together, you kind of like, sometimes you're just thinking about how interesting it's going to be, because for some athletes, it's not all about hitting, specific zones and targets and distances and durations. It is a matter of like, I want to go out and enjoy my training, but I do want to do it in a structured way. So how much science do they need in their training plan?
How much science do you need to know if someone's having fun or not? Like that's not scientific at all. And you could do the same thing all the time and you could always have different effects. So motivation, what's the science of motivation along with all the physical aspects?
And placing like a rest day on Wednesday because there's school sports in the evening and there's something on in the early morning. It has to be the day where it's your turn on carpool. There's not science.
No.
There's no science. And is it even a rest day? Like whatever. But when you're putting a plan in place around that, that's not sciencey. There's no science based around that. But then the sessions that, preface it and follow it, there is a lot of science put into that individual session.
Yeah, definitely. Like everything else needs to be based around science and the evidence that we've seen and a lot of what we've presented so far. So it's not going to be 100% science-based all the time. And I think we've shown that as we've gone through all the other modules. Like there's a lot of science in there and then there's a lot of practical things and then just what we've learned by experience. So you could be a really bad coach by just going off of your feelings all the time. But you could also be a really bad coach by just going off of science all the time. And when you can bring it all together, that's how you are a good coach and you're a good athlete.
That's right. And so within this module, we all work in so many different sports and even the different disciplines like within a sport. If you just think about mountain biking, how many, new eras of mountain biking there are. So we're not going to get into the, how to write a mountain bike week, how to write a triathlon week for, a weekend warrior, a pro, and a beginner. We're going to get into more of the basics and fundamentals, sort of like the 5 pillars of basic analysis and Training Peaks. We're going to get into what you need to do to ensure that you've got everything in place that you can then apply your specifics. So let's go through those. All right, so we have 6 steps to writing a successful training plan. First off, we've got to pick an event or 3 events. Sometimes these are ones that we have in our head or we need to actually go looking for them. Other times it's dictated to us by a season. Then we've got the timeline. We work backwards from our events to figure out what, how much time we've got, what's on between now and the events. We've got analyzing the events. So that's figuring out the demands of the specifics of the event so we can, figure out how to train for them appropriately. The training phases, we've got writing the plan and then the critical evaluation of the plan. So here's a template which you'll find in your resources. This is a great way, especially if you enjoy a bit of pen to paper. You can print it out and just put down a lot of the information around the events so you can get an idea of what you're looking at for each event. So you got some notes there, you got a skeleton plan of 10 days. So you can start to just write stuff down and get an idea of what you're going to be looking at. So that is available in your additional resources.
I really like putting pen to paper with my athletes, and like we can do it all online, like all our interactions online, but I still have a notebook that I keep for everyone. And that way it's all there and I can see what we talked about and I always leave notes. So I really like this template that you're giving.
Yeah, it's great for to photocopy and then just send to the athlete as well if you keep things online. Or you can just, depends how tech savvy you are. Some people are fully paperless, and so you can just write on it with your device. But whatever it is, I've found it really helpful to just, I've got that everything else kind of header there, which those can be really important things that you might otherwise forget about these events. And so just being able to write it down, those specific notes that athletes give to you, or if you are an athlete that you need to incorporate within your plan, I'm always tired after 2 weeks. I can never handle a 3-week cycle. Stuff like that. It's just really important. All right, picking an event. When you're picking an event, Matt, how long do you like to have an athlete pick their key event? How long between them starting a plan and their key event?
I think generally, the longer we have to train for an event, the better we can do for it. But if we have less than 6 weeks to train for an event, I think we have a hard time getting to our best performance.
That's right. I find optimal around 12 to 16. When you're less than that, you got to juggle what they've done previously and potentially some of the mistakes they've made up until the point that's led them to getting a coach. Whereas if you start to go kind of beyond 16 weeks, 20, 24 weeks, the interest can start to wane and it can become harder to try and, piece everything together in an exciting way to lead them towards the event. And so I find minimum of 12 and then maximum of kind of 20, with 16 being the ideal for me anyway.
Yeah, I think a lot of this is going to depend on where you live in the world. So in New Zealand, we can still have a lot of events in the winter, whereas in the States, for example, or Northern Hemisphere, where they're getting a lot of snow, you're just not competing in the winter at all. So you only have that summer period. And then within that summer period, we might pick 1 or 2 key events that we're aiming for. And usually we'll try and separate those out if possible. But sometimes there's just a national championships, which is a really common goal. We want to be at our peak for the national championships. And then we need to figure out another place to peak. So that way We don't kind of just train for 6 months leading into national championships.
So once we've picked our event, we've got to analyze it. And that really becomes integral to putting a good plan in place, because we need to understand the demands of the event in terms of what we need to be prepared for. So just because it's an ultra marathon, that doesn't mean you can prepare exactly the same way. If there's hills, if there's flat, if there's technical terrain, all those need to be incorporated. So you can go through and in whatever event you're doing, you can cover these kind of things. The distance and duration, because they can be very different as well. Like, Matt, there's so many variations in mountain bike courses, especially just across the US alone. East Coast, West Coast courses are different. And just because they're both, 30 or 40K races, the duration can be very different.
Yeah, like actually we really have a good idea of what to expect when we're doing cross-country mountain biking, but only broadly. So by the time we get to the event, we haven't seen the course. We don't know what's going to be on it, how many technical sections, how steep the climbs are going to be, which could affect our training. And a lot of times we just have to guess on a lot of this stuff. And the good news is, like, it doesn't really change our general preparation. But as we get closer to the event, we have to start to have event-specific training sessions. Then we start to find out more information about the event. So we might find, for example, that there's lots of steep climbing, like really steep climbing. So then it's something that we can focus on.
The overall planning in terms of like a distance duration, what I found super helpful for newbie athletes is to look at past results and competitors. Generally, like where we've competed in that same kind of realm and region or nation, depending on where you live. And so some of the same people keep popping up. And what I really like to do when an athlete goes, like, I've never done a multi-stage or multi-day like enduro. I've only ever done like a 3-stage one day. Then we can look and go, oh, well, do you know anyone who's done this event before? Like, yeah, have you raced them? And you can have a look and go, oh, look where they, look how long it took them. And you're similar to them. So that's probably what we can expect, how long each track and each day is going to take you. So I find that like really useful. And then some of the basic ones, like check out the environmental conditions. If you're training in winter for a summer event, you need to incorporate that. And this one's more like for ultras, start time and start line location. It depends where you've booked your Airbnb, because there could be a very big difference between like when you have to wake up, when you have to get in the car, and when you actually have to start the race. And also maybe there's registration, there's organization. Like some of those things, it just pays to have that in your mind before you start to like really get into it. All right, again, so putting a bit of pen to paper, it's the timeline. And this is like one of my favorite ones, Matt, to do, because often you see like an athlete's eyes like get wider and wider as they see how little time 20 weeks looks when you start to put it on calendar and you start to incorporate everything they have on between now and the event.
Yeah, 20 weeks goes by pretty fast. And you're like, oh, okay, I guess we better get cracking.
Yeah, and so what I've done here is, this is actually mine. And so this was last year, and I've incorporated, the stuff we talked about on Module 5 with like a base training and marathon specific. So this is like a marathon build. And you can see I had a couple weddings. I had a race there. I had my wife's birthday. I was planning on a 3-on, 1-off style. And I've got my speed weeks in there. And as you start to circle things, and the pink there is like public holidays, you start to say, oh, wow, like how many days like do I have, especially if you're a weekend warrior and you're away for some weekends, how many big sessions can I complete? Because you see there, like I'm away for 2 weddings in the blue. If those now need to be maybe long, I need to squeeze in my long tempos in the midweek, because I'm not going to have the time in the weekend. And you want to figure that out pretty early before you get to that week and go, oh crap, I'm not going to have enough time. And so setting out your timeline is really important.
I like how you have the weddings in there. It just goes to show that like we all have normal lives. right? And we need to be able to plan around those things. So I'm guessing when you went to those weddings, you really had to change your training, which means that week in between the weddings, you probably trained a little bit differently.
That's exactly right. And you can see I've highlighted Friday to Sunday because they were Saturday weddings, but you travel Friday, you travel Sunday, you're tired. And as we'll cover the critical evaluation, but it's important to be honest with yourself. Like, oh yeah, wedding doesn't start till 3. You know, I should be able to fit it in the morning. And maybe you can, but most probably you can't.
Yeah, it's really important to plan around normal life because we all have one and it's going to happen. So plan around it.
And that leads into my pro tip with Training Peaks. You can use the annual training plan. A lot of people don't really use this feature. Matt, have you ever used it?
No. No, I tried it once and it looked pretty cool, but I guess what I've found is so many things change.
Yeah, you're right. Well, you're definitely right in the most recent global pandemic. But what I find like really cool about this annual training plan is how easy it is just to put races in. So you can you don't have to scroll through and go, oh, what date was it? You can just keep putting them in, put the priority to them, and then you'll be able to have a weekly countdown on the end of your training week. Of like the weekly summary on Training Peaks will say, 13 weeks till A event and then B event. And so you can keep an eye on like how long they've got. You don't need to scroll down to see weeks until on the actual event. So check out the annual training plan, have a play around with it. You don't need to use it in terms of like dictating when each phase needs to be and how much TSS and time and duration that each athlete needs to do. You can do that, but just being able to put in everything, even just like these weddings and stuff, can speed up the process. That's my pro tip. All right, writing the plan. Matt, how do you write a plan?
Well, I always work backwards when I'm writing a plan. So if we have a main event that we're targeting, I always know that we're going to have X number of taper weeks, and I put those in immediately, and then I work backwards from there.
Yeah, same. So I work backwards in that I put in all of the other events that we've identified. I either use the annual training plan or I just do it, and I put notes of all the stuff we've identified in the timeline. And then from there, I kind of just start throwing things down in a 10-day cycle. So I do that, and they won't be specific per se. I might drag and drop some of them from like the workout library, but I'm just kind of putting like run, ride, swim. Okay, what does that look like? Move that around. Oh, they need this day off. And before I go to the next step, do you do anything like that? That's what I highly recommend doing something like that. It really allows you to like step back and see what it looks like.
Definitely. Like I definitely do that. And because each person is probably going to have their schedule that they already go by. Like they always can do this on a Thursday. They always do this on a Sunday. And we start to put that together, and then we see what we can do working around that and the other events in their lives.
Yeah, that's right. So it's the best place to start is to, you don't need to go all in terms of like thinking, oh, it's Monday and they need to be doing this, but you haven't put together the rest of the week. So save yourself some time, just drag and drop from your workout library, or just type in, run 30, run 60, bike 80, like that kind of stuff. And then you can have a look back. And I like to use at least 10 days because, your body doesn't start fresh on Monday. And you can go, oh, wow, across that, we haven't incorporated more than one long ride, or we have 2 and only 1 rest day. It's just a quicker way to put everything down that you're going to need within a training plan over a couple of weeks.
So tell me about your TSS check. So after you start to put together the workouts, you put in specific workouts that are automatically populating with the training stress score. What are you looking at here?
This is probably more so if I have a lot of history with an athlete, and they've been using Training Peaks for a while. We discussed the pros and cons of TSS, training stress score, but at least if they've done it the same way every single week for every single session, it at least provides a good ballpark at which they can handle. So I'll go back and I'll have a look across, 4 to 8 weeks on average. What is their weekly TSS, their weekly training stress score? So a lot of the time, Training Peaks will, if you've got a structured workout, or automatically populate it based off of their thresholds. And other times, again, I just go back, check out a few sessions. What does a normal, hard bike ride have in terms of a TSS? Cool. So you can see there, I've actually just put 60 TSS in myself. Then I'll check what the week looks like. It's 364 here, and I can then look back and go, oh, well, on average, they've never completed more than 300. So this is starting to look a bit hefty. So we either need to reduce the intensity, reduce the duration, frequency, whatever, but it's just a good way to, when you're putting that skeleton plan together, just check like if it's going to be too much or not enough compared to what an athlete's done in the past or previous training block.
Yeah, I think it's really good as a snapshot, and it's like really the only way to get the broader picture. So you're kind of zooming in on this week and saying, okay, how does this fit overall in the plan? And you can start to understand how the next weeks will fit overall as you're building towards your event. So it's not like just if you had, 370 TSS that the week would be, we'd have to take away 1 minute from each workout or something like that. But it's just a really nice overall snapshot to get an idea of the stress of the week.
Yeah, because, if we're just looking at time or distance, sometimes that can be so varied depending on so many different things. And the TSS is going to give us, like you say, like a great snapshot about what that week's going to look like in terms of the training stress. So my pro tip is build a template training plan and use that as your skeleton. So a lot of the time we've got athletes that fit into different categories, and I've done like base phase running plans for all athletes, kind of, your 3 to 4 days, 4 to 5 days, 5+ days a week. You can throw that down there, and then you can move it. A lot of people aren't necessarily just training in the weekend and working 9 to 5 Monday to Friday. So you can move it around and then you can look, but it's going to save yourself time if you've made one in the past. No specifics for the individual, just make a template, throw it down, and then you can at least see what that looks like in terms of this athlete. Start to overlay the specifics on top of that. All right, Matt, so these are my 5 rules for a skeleton training plan. So like I said, you're just throwing sessions down, drag and dropping, using a template, whatever you're doing. But these are some of the rules I always put in place for the majority of athletes that I work with. So we want 1 day off, okay? We don't want to have more than 2 high intensity sessions in a row or 2 long sessions back to back. And then Monday's not a new day. It's not a new week for your body. If you went hard, you went big on Sunday, it doesn't mean that Monday's now 0, as it often looks on a lot of these like analytical softwares. And also, like, we want to limit the amount of high intensity sessions we do each week. That can be hard. It can be really hard with triathletes. I understand that, but if we work on that 80-20 principle previously discussed, like, we can start to get an idea of overall what that kind of 80-20 or intensity outlay looks like for each zone. Would you want to add any, Matt, like any rules, or is that something like you would encompass with your athletes as well?
Yeah, I think my rules would probably look a little bit different, and especially depending on when we're training and what we're training for. We usually have 1 day off per week. Sometimes we have more than 2 high intensity days in a row, not often. And it also depends on how intense they were. And with cycling, like, a lot of times we have lots of 90-minute days in a row. But if someone doesn't have a lot of time and they don't have a long training history, that's definitely not something we're going to do. But it's definitely easier to get in 90+ minutes of cycling than it is to get 90 minutes of running in. And I totally agree that the Monday isn't a new week for your body. The problem is that so many of our schedules are on 7-day cycles. So Monday is always a new week for our lives, and training needs to fit around our lives. So I like your idea of the 10-day template, and then we just need to make sure that we're not treating Monday as a totally new restart for our body, that we need to continuously train and recover as we're going through our plan.
I say these are 5 rules for a skeleton plan because like you say, there's going to be a situation where if you have a look in the video resources of Matt and I putting a plan together, it's going to be back to back, but they also may only train 2 out of the 5 days, Monday to Friday, and those are the days they have available. But as the rules for a skeleton plan is, you don't want to do that straight off the bat. You don't want to be going in, because you may then start to overlay, if they are 6-day-a-week trainer, now you've got more room to work with in terms of where you put those high intensity sessions, recovery days, recovery sessions, easy, aerobic, long. So that's like, those are the 5 rules of just putting the plan in place. If you do that, you're going to start pretty well, and then you can look more at the specifics. But I guess that's where it starts to build that art and science, right? Because the science says don't do that. Like, don't do back-to-back high intensity days if you can avoid it, because then you're going to be able to adapt faster, you're going to be able to fresher, you're going to be able to complete the session more appropriately. But then, when an athlete doesn't have that time available, you can't incorporate that.
Yeah, like if you took your skeleton plan that you start with an athlete, and you just take this blanket statement and say everyone's always going to have 2 hard days in a row, and we're always going to have 2 long days in a row, I think we would start to get in trouble, right? So if we have that skeleton plan and it's more of a basic approach, if we have a more advanced athlete that's doing these kind of things, then we can add those in as we need to. But if we have everyone doing highly advanced training techniques or training strategies, that'd be a big problem. So this is a good approach.
So my pro tip around information is, when you prescribe workouts to athletes, each athlete has a huge array of terminology, knowledge. So I try to include as much information as possible, which is going to save like you as a coach looking back on the workout or what you're trying to prescribe, and the athlete, so that they know what they are going to complete. Structured workouts within Training Peaks are so helpful. Like, Matt, how have you found those for utilizing that and explaining to an athlete when they can just have it on their device?
Yeah, like this is one that we use for mountain biking, but you could just as easily upload it to Zwift. And that's really handy for me, because to write a description out every time is just really difficult. And the power output that's required is going to change for every athlete. So if I'm constantly writing that for each individual, it would be an incredible amount of time and just like calculations based on their threshold. So this is great tool.
Yeah, and with the threshold, you can say, I run at threshold, right at tempo. People are like, well, I don't know, like, is that 8 out of 10? Is that 6 out of 10? It's like, what does that mean? And so having these structured workouts along with the information to support them helps the athlete go, oh, I see, I'm starting to feel what tempo threshold means for this coach. And then again, we have our zones, which can help, each athlete and coach speak the same language. But the structured workouts and descriptions, super simple way to save yourself time. You apply that with your template training plans, and you're starting to save yourself a lot of time.
Yeah, so just don't make the same mistake that I made on this one, where I didn't change the description based on how I changed the structured workout. So I still have in the description some all-out efforts at the end, which obviously I deleted when we put this workout in a plan that we made for Steve.
Yeah, we've all been there, Matt. You'd say 3 times something, and there's 4 of them in there.
Yeah. We have really big workout libraries, and we need to be careful that when we're changing them and saving them back to the library, that it's ready to go, because what we're going to do later on is we're going to use it directly from the library, thinking that it's ready to go. So it needs to be ready to go by the time it gets in there.
All right, so now we've put our plan together. We've started using these structured workouts. We've used our templates. We've covered the 5 rules, and we're able to figure out, like, what is it that this athlete needs each week, each training phase, what their timeline is. And once we've done it, we need to have a critical evaluation. So kind of look at it and take yourself away from maybe knowing the athlete. As a coach, we know a lot of athletes. Like, we know them very personally. We may have worked with them for a long time. And so, you might think, oh, they really like to do more, and I don't feel comfortable giving them less because they might not like it, or they might go off and do their own thing. But you need to take a step back and go, like, what does this look like? How am I fitting their time availability? Do I have progressive loading? Is that a plan? Like, am I increasing the TSS, the mileage, or the duration each week within a training block or a training phase? Is there rest days? Where are the rest days placed? Like, are you getting enough? What are the target sessions? Athletes really like to know what are the target sessions within a week so they can target them and be fresh and ready, and understand that the session before that can be an optional one if they're tired, which leads into, day-to-day loading. How's the session looking day to day? Like Matt and I said, it can kind of be dictated by time availability, but as you get into like more professional, experienced athletes, you need to have a look quite carefully at the day-to-day loading to ensure it's evenly distributed throughout a week or a couple of weeks. And then progress tracking. Have you put those progress measures in that we've talked about? Because they're going to be important to ensuring that you know that this training plan is working or not working in specific areas, like those super short, high intensity sprints, power outputs, speeds, paces, and then the longer, more anaerobic threshold based stuff. So that's really the critical evaluation that you need to look at just before you publish the plan or push it off to the athlete, to ensure that you have put together a good plan, you have incorporated all the science we've talked about, and it is going to be targeted towards the event that we have and the athlete that is working towards that event, because it needs to be specific.
One of the things that I do when I make a custom training plan, normally if we do a custom plan, it'll be like 8 weeks long, and it'll be building to a specific event. And what I do is I build it. So I do exactly the process that we talked about. I build it, and then I just leave it, and I go away for a couple days, and I don't tell the athlete that it's ready to go or anything, so because we have plenty of time. And I just wait and think about it again a different day and see if there's anything that I need to change. Sometimes I don't have to change anything after a few days. Other times I might be like, I have no idea why I put that there. That doesn't even make sense. And then I change it, and then it's ready to go to the athlete.
Yeah, that's right. So however you're going about it, the critical evaluation is an important factor, because one thing, Matt, like I've thought about, as any human, I've moods, right? You'll be in a different mood on a different day, a different time. And sometimes my mood can really affect the way I write the training. If I'm going through overtraining personally, or if I'm feeling amazing in my training, I may be more ambitious to what I think an athlete could handle. Or if they have just hit their PBs and weekly, like max mileage, I think maybe they can do more, and maybe get carried away about it. And so doing what you do, great idea. A couple of days, come back to it, just glance an eye over it and go, I don't know why it's understandable now that they're tired 3 days in, because we got carried away. So when we're prescribing a training plan, training phase to athletes, there's some things like you need to convey to them to make sure that they're on the same page as you. And so there's some other areas that work alongside your training plan to improve the overall fitness and performance. So that is like keeping signs, keeping track of fatigue, looking at the diet, injury strategies, technique, injury prevention strategies, like being honest, making sure the athlete's being honest with themselves, getting your advice, and always remembering the plan, finding training partners or not in some cases. But these are really good things that you can push off to your athlete in an email or Facebook message, just to go, hey, look, make sure when you're following this plan, if it's just a one-off plan that you've written and they're not in contact with you for a month or a few weeks, just keep an eye on some of these things. All right, Matt, FAQs. How can I avoid junk miles in my training plan? The old junk miles.
Yeah, I don't know about junk miles. Miles is miles, if you ask me. But as far as how it fits in a training plan is definitely going to change. So junk mile doesn't mean we're not doing anything, but junk miles can be we're negatively affecting the rest of our plan. And that's really the way I see junk miles. What do you think?
It is a hard one, because and like at the scientific level, more training results in a greater stress, which results in a greater adaptation. And where junk miles fits in to that, I think, is minimizing recovery time. So it's more like, that's what I've put there. Like, ask yourself, what is the purpose of this training? Because you need to look at it and go, well, it doesn't really have a purpose. Like, I have these 5 sessions across the week, and I'm only doing an extra one maybe for the sake of it. And so are you minimizing your recovery time or ability to adapt? And like I said in the previous one, like, I don't think recovery or rest is like the right word for us. It needs to be super compensation day or like adaptation day. But anyway, yeah, like junk miles, that's the main thing is like, what's the point? You don't want to be prescribing junk miles, and you don't want, as an athlete, you don't want to be like just throwing away your training because you think more is better.
Yeah, I always think of like the classic, and this is where we have the podcast episode, building a plan for Steve, is he always goes out and he goes too hard on his easy days. So that means he's just recovering less the rest of the week. So junk miles to me is when you're doing that and just going way too hard on the easy days, and then it suddenly becomes junk in terms of a plan. So, yeah, but you're right. Totally agree.
Yes, and that's like, what is the point of the session? Because if it's an easy day, it's not junk, but it becomes junk when you start to go out with your crew
and go too hard.
Yeah.
That's when it becomes junk.
And does a training plan have to have a rest day every week? Go.
It's nice to have a day off, right? Like, we have days off in everything we do. I think it's important to have a rest day, but as we get into this super difficult period of training leading into our taper, we're probably going to take away some rest days.
So I said short answer no, long answer like it's like anything, it depends. Most of the time we're working with weekend warriors. They want to be fresh to hit their sessions in the weekend. They want to be able to recover. So like, short answer, like, no, like, you don't need a rest day within a plan, but for the most people, it's going to be prudent to put one in, and whether they like it or not.
Okay, so here is the podcast episode that I'm talking about, where we built a training plan for Steve. He's training for a mountain bike race and also a half marathon, and we show you our process for building that plan for Steve. So it's been a really popular episode, and I think you should check it out. We also have a video of us doing that exact podcast, and we showed our screens, dragging and training workouts and building this whole plan across 6 weeks for Steve. So if you want to see kind of how we approach this from a sports scientist coach perspective, and how that we put these workouts together exactly how we talked about in this module, go check that video out.
Dr. Matt and I started the Performance Advantage podcast to help runners, riders, and outdoor competitors integrate sports science more effectively into their training and racing.
So over the last few years, Dr. Will and I have covered topics like the lactate threshold, training zones, power meters, and fatigue. Now we're condensing these popular and misunderstood topics into practical courses.
Our courses take our same podcasting style approach to learning and education, and we break it down into bite-sized chunks that you can digest either all at once or as practical little resources to use as and when you need them.
So the biggest difference between our course and any other course you might have taken is that we don't lecture you. It's a conversation between Will and I, and we're explaining complex sports science principles in an easy to understand manner.
Yeah, we also integrate like how we use them on the regular. Our courses come with a certificate of completion, as well as a lot of takeaway resources such as training plans, scientific articles, and quizzes that you can do to check your progress along the way.
Our sports science courses are available now. Register on performanceadvantagepodcast.com for immediate access.